All right, so let's talk about the code that we've now written and are looking at. The code that we're looking at, this is all HTML. HTML. And HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Hypertext Markup Language. Go ahead and write this up here, in fact. Hypertext Markup Language. That's HTML. Okay. Common things to see in HTML are these angle brackets. Common things to see in HTML are these weird attributes. Okay? This is all HTML, and to break down what we've actually written here, we have this very first line, doctype HTML. All this is doing is telling our browser that this is an HTML document. The type of this document is HTML. It's telling our browser how to read this. It's telling our browser how to read this. Okay? And after our doctype tag here, anything in between angle brackets like this is called a tag, but we'll get to that. After our doctype HTML tag, we have our HTML tag. And this HTML tag, like most HTML tags, most tags in HTML, has both an opening tag and a closing tag. Okay, an opening tag and a closing tag, like our title here, opening tag, closing tag, or the body, opening tag, closing tag. Everything between the opening and closing HTML tags is inside the HTML element. The HTML element, okay? These two tags make up the whole HTML element. These two tags make up the whole title element. These two tags make up the whole body element. These two tags make up the whole head element. All right, so we have an element with two tags. We have an HTML element. We have a head element, a title element, and then we have this weird link element which doesn't have a closing tag, right? There's no, see, it doesn't even want to type it for me. There's no closing link tag, and there's a reason for that. Links do not have a closing tag. Now, this is basically the exception. There are a few elements which do not have closing tags. However, 9 times out of 10 in HTML, all of your elements will have and require closing tags. Okay? Head element, title element, link element. Both the title element and the link element are said to be inside the head element. And this is also why they're indented past the head tags. Okay, if you keep all of your elements on the same line, the same vertical line, your code will get very difficult to read very quickly. So anytime you insert an element inside another element, you're going to want to indent it one level further. Okay? So I'm going to start writing what are called comments. And comments, just like where it says hypertext markup language here up top. Comments are great ways to write little notes, reminders, or indicators to yourself or to any other developer who may one day read your code. So I'm going to take the opportunity here to just label all of these elements for my own benefit, and I suggest that you do the same. Actually, let's just write HTML element here. And I'm going to come down to the closing HTML tag and write closing HTML tag. Actually, let's change that. Not closing HTML tag. Let's write end HTML element. Okay? And we'll change this to start HTML element. Start HTML element, end HTML element. Now, if you're wondering how I wrote those comments, that's one of the keyboard shortcuts we'll get to. But before we get there, to create a comment in HTML, it's very simple. You want to write less than, exclamation mark, minus minus, and then at the end of your comment, you want to write minus minus, greater than. Okay, that's how you create a comment. I'd like you to practice that a couple times because it feels pretty annoying to write all of that out, but it is important that you know how to in the event that you need to write yourself some comments. I promise once we introduce the keyboard shortcut for comments, it becomes much easier, but for the time being, let's just write them out. So we have start HTML element up here, end HTML element down here. I'd like you right now to pause this video and do the same thing for all of the other elements on your page. Maybe not the title, but definitely for the head and for the body. Okay? Label the elements correctly. Label the tags correctly. Label them in the same way which we labeled our HTML tags. And make sure that the comments are sitting on the same indented line as the tag which they're referring to. Okay, so I don't want to see the comment for head to start right here. Oop. I don't want it to be here, I want it to be here on the same vertical line as the tag to which it will be referring. Okay, so take a moment, pause the video, and just give that a try. It should only take you a minute. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and do this myself. Start head element. End head element. Okay, notice my comments are starting on the same vertical line as the tags to which they are referring. Then let's do the body. Start body element. End body element. Okay, let's close some of these gaps. Okay, now we got some nice, useful comments. This may feel like overkill, and, you know, it is a little bit. But this is a really important step for this early stage, okay? We've written comments and effectively labeled our major elements, our HTML element, our head element, and our body element. Now let's throw a comment inside this title element. Inside this title element. I want this title to say, insert title here. I'm sorry, I don't want the title to say that. I want the comment to say, insert title here. Okay, so take a moment and give that a try. Put a comment inside this title element. Think about what that means. Think about what it means for something to be inside an element. And what I want that something to be is a comment which says insert title here. So give that a try. All right. Hopefully you paused the video and gave it a try, and I'm not just wasting my breath here. But let's go ahead and do this. To put a comment inside the title, what I want to do is open up that opening title tag and that closing title tag. So before I even insert a comment, let's take the opportunity to start title element. End title element. And in between, I'm going to insert a comment which says insert title here. This is looking a little chaotic, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these title tag comments. There we go. This is what we are going for. For this, however, we don't actually need this element to be broken up. I mean, this is completely correct, and if you did this, I'm actually ecstatic, because that means you are effectively absorbing what you're seeing everywhere else on this page. But just to keep things a little more contained, I'm going to put all of these on the same line. Okay, so now that comment is quite literally right between the opening and closing title tags. This will not hurt our code. Now I'm going to add another comment right above this link element, which says link to my CSS style sheet. Oop. Okay. I know it looks like we have a lot of comments, but these are extremely important at this juncture. So now that we have some comments, now that we understand what makes up an element, now that we understand what a tag is, I want you to take a moment and try to create a div element. A div element. Now, you probably don't know what that is. You may not have seen it before. That's totally fine. That's the point. I want you to start taking a little bit of responsibility for your learning, which is to say I'm deliberately telling you to do something you don't already know how to do. So if I say create a div element inside our body element, you should then think about what is a div element, what does it look like, how do I write one, and how do I write one inside my body element. You should start asking yourself the questions that you need in order to achieve this, in order to complete this small task. And if you cannot answer any of those questions, or if you feel that you don't have the correct answer, I want you to try to look it up. I want you to open your browser, and I want you to try to Google HTML div or HTML div element and see what comes up. See if you can effectively create a div element inside our body element. Pause the video here, give that a try. Alright, so hopefully you gave it a try. In order to create a div element, we're going to need an opening div tag and a closing div tag. And that's going to look like this. Opening div tag, closing div tag. Okay, now we're going to talk about what a div is in a bit. But if you made it this far, excellent. That is fantastic. Now I'm going to give you a couple of other small tasks I want you to try. Okay, I want you to create an H1 element. Then I want you to create another div element and create an h1 element inside that div element. And then I want you to create an input element. All right, 3 additional small tasks which you shouldn't already know how to do. Take a couple minutes and see if you can do this. You now have the answer, the solution to the very first one. So extrapolate based on this information, based on this solution. How are you going to create an h1 element? How are you going to create a div element and another h1 element? How are you going to put the h1 inside that div? How are you going to create an input element? Extrapolate based on this solution to complete these 3 tasks. And what I want you to do is I want you to try your best to check your answers on your own before you continue watching this video to see the solutions. Okay, so if you think you know, great, write it down, do it, and then try to check it, which means open up your browser and try looking up, well, what does an h1 element look like? What does an input element look like? Can I find an example of a div with an h1 inside? Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but give it a try. You must try to check your answers on your own. And then unpause the video and come back. Alright, so to create an h1 element, we need an opening h1 tag and a closing h1 tag. And that's an h1 element. Most h1s, which we'll talk about, actually have some text inside of them, like this. They have some text inside of them in between the opening h1 tag and the closing h1 tag. But if you don't have that text, that's okay. You still created an h1 element effectively. Now, create another div element and create an h1 element inside that div element. Well, first I'm going to create another div. You already know how to do that. And let's also create another h1. And the question is, how do I get this h1 element inside this div element? Well, what I need to do is take this h1, open up my div element, and paste. Move the h1 inside the div element between the opening and closing div tags. Please note also, the h1 is indented. Okay, if you came up with this, great, you're very, very close, but you must remember to indent whenever you go one level deeper inside an element. Okay, so this is an h1 element inside of a div element. Finally, the input element. Now I hope you really gave this a try. I hope you really came up with something and checked your answer. Okay, so instinct might be to do something like this. And if you got here, it's a good first step. But if you tried to check this answer, you hopefully would have found that an input element, like a link element, does not have a closing tag. An input element is one of those few exceptions which does not have a closing tag. And that's what I wanted you to discover on your own in checking your answers. It is important to me that you're able to see and perceive differences like that or rules like that while you are sourcing solutions to problems. It's one of the ways in which we need to train you to start thinking and paying attention to. Okay, so these are the solutions to those three tasks. This is our HTML document. This is going to be the document that actually loads our web page. In fact, why don't I try to load this right now? I'm going to save my index.html as it stands. Then I'm going to right-click anywhere in the black inside my index and select Open in Browser. And that opened up this page. It says Hello World, and it has this interesting little search bar. This is the code that we just wrote. Okay, so things to take away from this. The index.html is the document which loads our web page. The code which is written in our index.html is what will render on our web page. Now the code we see on our web page will always sit inside our body element. Okay? So I like to create like a lot of space in between the opening and closing body tags. I like to keep a lot of empty space between those tags and the code inside them as well. The code that we want to actually see, so this H1 that we actually want to see on our page, it must be written inside the body element. Code that occurs elsewhere, such as in the head, is code which will not be seen. For example, if I put a title inside here, my first site, save, and reload, I don't see my title anywhere. I do see it up here in the tab, which is interesting, but it's not loaded on my site. It's not rendered on my site anywhere in particular. Okay? The code which you write outside of the body element will not appear on your site. Any code which you want to be involved, which you want to show, which you want to render on your website must occur inside your body element. As a result, this is where we're going to spend most of our time in our index.html files. Other takeaway is we haven't discussed this link yet, but the long and short of it is this link connects our index.html with our main.css file. And we're going to talk about what that means and how these two languages work together in one of the following videos. But HTML lays down all of these elements, and CSS in our main.css file allows us to style them. It allows us to change their appearance. Alright, so we're going to talk more about this relationship in a little bit and how to write CSS in a following video.